Hello, fellow Rebel Capitalists. Hope you're well. We're going to have a great show today. We've got back by popular demand, Chris Irons from the QTR podcast. He's going to be doing some commentary on a lot of stuff right now. The data from the small businesses is starting to trend the other direction, unfortunately. And we've got Powell coming out today with big comments. We'll see how it or if it moved markets. And then we've got Trump tariffs, new Trump tariffs. This playing into how Trumponomics is going to proceed throughout the economy, throughout the rest of 2025. Got a lot of stuff to get into. So, Chris, first and foremost, buddy, let's go over to this Wall Street Journal article. And this is based on a new survey from small business. Now, right after Trump won the election, the sentiment with small business was euphoric, to say the least. And now it's starting to shift slightly. And I get it because of tariffs. I think they're still very positive on Trump's policies, but you just don't know what's going to happen next. And as a business, that type of uncertainty, it's tough. It's tough to decide what you're going to be doing in 6 months, how much inventory you should keep, what to charge customers, if the goalposts are kind of constantly moving. So the title of this article, Trump's conflicting business policies, so economic uncertainty. And now, hats off to Donald Trump. He's really been shaking things up here. And they mention this right off the bat. It usually takes years for a president to leave his mark on the economy. Trump has done it in just a few weeks. His plan to raise tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China has rattled markets, boardrooms. Some businesses are seeing signs that deportations could affect their workforces. More than 40,000 federal employees preparing to resign. We talked about that on the last podcast. And then at the same time, Trump is talking about a pro-fossil fuel agenda. He's talking about more than that. He's talking about taking over the Gaza Strip, among other things. He's got goals. The end goal seems to be an economy, a smaller role for imports, immigrants, federal government, and bigger one for private investment, which we are all for. But those are the intentions. With economic policies, usually the results differ quite substantially from those intentions. Next, they say, while Trump's election was fueled in part by voter concerns of inflation, standard of living, he nonetheless inherited a solid economy, which I think is complete nonsense. And then they go into why some of these businesses, the optimism is changing to pessimism due to this uncertainty. And we talked about that with the University of Michigan survey with consumers, but this is filtering through small businesses as well. So, Chris, what are your thoughts on this? I know you do a lot of writing on Substack, and I'm sure you've tried to, go through the pros and cons with the tariffs. What do you think, buddy?
I just think, first off, I had no clue what we were going to discuss ahead of time today. So just taking this at face value, I think that Trump deserves credit, at least for being decisive. I wrote the other day on Twitter, you don't really need to like his policies or agree with him or like him at all, to objectively take a step back and recognize that he has been more decisive in the action he's taken in the last 20 days than we've seen through some 4 years of people's presidencies before, at least in my lifetime. The amount of shit that he's getting done in a matter of 3 weeks, it's all the things that he ran on. And so I think,
I would say he's gotten more done in the last 3 weeks than the combined total of presidents over the last 2 decades.
Right. Even if you just look at immigration, right, where the two candidates stood on immigration going into the election, where the big criticism of Trump was that he wasn't kind of caving to this bipartisan bill that they wanted to get through Congress. Like, there was no talk about the fact that as soon as Biden came into office, he undid all of these executive orders that Trump had put into place to essentially secure the border. And anyone that has saw a chart of border crossings or confrontations at the border knows that illegal immigration skyrocketed under Biden. I mean, there was some under the last few presidents, but it skyrocketed under Biden. So to kind of see the way that Trump is being decisive, again, You don't have to agree with him. You can think he's an asshole. That's fine. But what you can't deny is the fact that he is being very decisive in implementing his agenda. And it, to me, as trying to be somewhat an of an objective observer, even though I prefer Trump's immigration policies to Biden's, from an objective standpoint, it concludes to me that all of this claptrap from the last administration talking about, hey, we're going to get this done, hey, bipartisan bill, hey, maybe we'll get it through the House, maybe we'll get it through the Senate, coming out 3.5 years into Biden's term and saying, oh, yeah, we should be having a discussion about illegal immigration, once it became a major campaign issue and was really the tip of the spear, I think, for Trump's campaign. It just goes to show you how disingenuous and just how much of a lie that was. Because if he can come in 20 days via executive order and, seal up the border in a way that Democrats, they would still be sitting around talking about. So what's the point? The point is, to go back to your article there, as I was just reading it as you put it up there, he's kind of moving fast and breaking things. Yeah. I think that there are a lot of unintended consequences that come with taking very swift, decisive action, whether it's making cuts like they're doing with USAID and these other organizations that they're looking into, whether it's in drastically changing immigration policy. There's going to be economic and there's going to be personal consequences. I was reading at one part in this article that, foreign workers were being affected. Well, people were going to have to know that was going to happen. So now the question is going to be, how does the administration and in turn, how do these small businesses and even, many of the people that voted for Trump, how do they navigate this corridor now? Because he is moving fast and there will be a wake left behind him. And so I think that will tell the tale, how we respond to it and what that portends for the next 3.5 years.
Yeah, and I think it's all about trade-offs as well. So as an example, when you look at the statistics on the border crossings, how they've been reduced by 95%, I think that's a good thing. But the trade-off there would be it's going all these executive orders, which I'm on the fence about, because my hesitation is that he's setting a precedence where now all of a sudden after Trump, we've got the president that takes more the role of a king as opposed to a president where there's checks and balances. So that's again a trade-off. I'm not saying it's bad, but on net balance, I don't know. There's good things and there's bad things.
It sets a tone for sure. Yeah. Like he's doing with a lot of international relations and this thing with, okay, like we're going to make the Gaza Strip the Mayan Riviera, and hey, we'll take Canada as the 51st state. And, I think a lot of it is posturing and a lot of it is setting a tone too, because there was an article shortly after he won the election that many people that were, on their way to cross the border illegally just turned around and went back. And I think to some degree that's necessary. It's necessary to, set the tone right from the beginning. It's like when they say, when you're the boss on your first day, go in and just fire one guy. It doesn't matter who it is, just to let people know that you're not afraid. Or, when you go to the clink, you got to go in, you got to fight immediately just to let people know that, they're not going to take your cornbread. So I think some of it is that, the question is now, how do we navigate what is really, it's a very delicate human situation from this point going forward.
Yeah. And also too, with the border crossings, I don't know how much of that was a result of increased enforcement or just taking away the freebies.
No, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know. But what I'm saying is that a lot of people are giving credit to the enforced security, and that just may be a correlation, not necessarily a causation, because another thing that happened, so why has the border crossings gone down by 95%? Was it increased security or the fact that Trump took away the $10,000 credit card? I think it's probably more so the former or the latter.
Either way, and I think it's difficult. Listen, like, growing up, I worked in kitchens my entire life. And so I've had my fair share of very like dear friends who I love that were in this country illegally, here to work, good people, honest people, you know. And I think about that all the time when this topic comes up because, I know most of these people that I was friendly with over the years were great people. They were from Honduras, they were from Guatemala, they were from Mexico. You know, it's a shame that it's a shame that the problem has gotten so out of hand that we're at a point where and a lot of this falls on the DAs in a lot of these major cities where illegal immigrants become the worst of the group, become become these repeat offenders, which just kind of, it's like a progressive problem, and one that if we don't arrest in meaningful fashion, at least decisively, to psychologically try to set the tone and posture that, hey, this is a top priority and we're enforcing it. Lest we forget the rule of law itself and the difference between legal and illegal immigration. Just putting that aside, without posturing like he's doing, I don't know how you make any meaningful impact. And I think if he doesn't do that, the problem spins out of. I think it was out of control under Biden. I mean, you just
absolutely was.
You look at the data. I mean, you look at the charts and the data, and for me, I don't understand the mindset of Texas, for example, saying they want to secure their own border, going down, putting barbed wire at their border. Okay, you have people that live in like McAllen, Texas, and these places that are right over the border, right? Texas is saying we want to secure our border. And the Biden administration goes to court to try to get Texas to remove the barbed wire from their own border. Like, not only is it flawed policy but it's a completely counterintuitive waste of resources. That's 50 to 100 people probably, if not more, involved in litigating that, getting it into court, putting the briefs together, putting the documents together, and then you have to occupy a judge, and you have to occupy part of the court system. It's ridiculous, and it would have just gotten way worse. So there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road to deal with here, but I think decisive action had to be taken. And I think about that. I think about that with. Go ahead. I was just going to say I think about that with my dear friends, in my mind, the people that I worked with in kitchens over 15 years,
But what I want to point out there, Chris, is they came here illegally, although there was quite a bit of security at the time, because I'm assuming they didn't come over when Biden was in office.
No, they didn't. This was a while ago.
Yeah. So my point there is I don't want people to be have the false pretense that somehow this additional security, even if Trump has implemented this, is going to eliminate illegal immigration, because no wall, no barbed wire fence, none of that stuff, it's going to matter, because there's literally hundreds of thousands of tunnels, and you can flood the tunnels, you can do whatever. But trust me, if someone wants to come over, they're still going to find a way to come over. That's just the
bottom line. If somebody's here and they get arrested for beating somebody on the streets of New York City, that's a wrap. If they're here illegally, like, forget about the fact that they're a U.S. citizen, they're going to be let go. But if they're here illegally, that has to be a wrap, and just little things like that, that'll make a difference.
I completely agree. I'm just saying that you're not going to eliminate the illegal immigration. Unfortunately, it's just a problem that you can minimize it. But by minimizing it, you're actually having a very net positive, because then the people who are coming over illegally are going to be like your friends, to where they actually want to work and be productive citizens, as opposed to people who are just flooding across the border because they're criminals, because they're just want freebies, which I think was
they're being incentivized to, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of employees that are from Venezuela, and they know a lot of people that friends and family members that they follow on Instagram and whatnot, that literally went through the Darien Gap up through Mexico to go to New York or wherever. And the main reason they were doing this is because they're like, hey, I'm getting all this free stuff. The border's wide open. Why
Right.
not? And then once I get there, my downside is I'll just get 10 grand. And my upside is I'm going to get a job somehow making $100,000 a year and become rich and famous like the Kardashians.
Right.
I mean, this is the way they see it in their mind.
It's like interest rates. You lower them and people are encouraged to spend and to borrow, and you raise them and people are encouraged to slow down in their spending and, not borrow.
Yeah.
It's behavioral incentives.
Yeah. So I think, again, on net balance, it's definitely a positive, but I don't think people should come to the conclusion that this is going to completely eliminate illegal immigration, because it's just not. There's too many. I've spent so much time in border towns in the Mexico side, and it would boggle your mind how easy it is for people to cross the border, regardless of a wall, regardless of whatever obstacle you want to throw in their way. They're going to get across. But hopefully it's people that want to work.
Of course, but the idea is to, get the numbers back down to like some type of meaningful. And I'm sending you this thing. I don't know. Can I put it here in the private chat here? Will you see it if I put this link in here? I don't know if you can put this chart up here.
Yeah, just put it in the.
It's in the private chat.
Let's see.
I don't know if that works, but if it doesn't, it's okay. It's a chart.
Pulling this up.
There it is. Yeah. Oh, you don't have a subscription here. I wonder if I could just send a photo of the chart. Hang on, let me see. It doesn't matter, but the chart just shows, everybody's seen it. No, I don't think I can put the image in here, but the chart just shows, look, 2010, 2015, 2019, 2021 up here, right? So even just a return back to the trend that we were on, nobody says they're going to stop it completely, but minimize it and set a tone.
Yep.
It's like crime. You're never going to stop all crime.
Yeah, because you have to say in order to reduce crime, let's say from 2% to 1%, again, you have to ask at what cost.
Right.
And at the end of the day, doing those trade-offs, it might not be worth it. So
100%.
So that's why I want to differentiate or try to get to the bottom as to why we've seen a 95% decrease, so we know where to allocate those resources. If it was just taking away the incentives, then we might not need to allocate as many resources to building a wall. Now, if you can prove that it was security, well, then we know that those resources are being utilized effectively. That's really what I'm getting at there.
Yeah, I don't see what the big controversy is about a wall. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, to me, that just makes sense. So you have a border of a country.
I'll tell you why it doesn't make sense, because the walls in future could be used to hold Americans in. Remember the Berlin Wall? I mean, we all remember that. And that was sold to the German people as a way to keep the bad guys out.
Right.
And what did that turn into? So I'm not saying that Trump is going to use the wall, if he builds it, to keep American citizens in, but you don't know who comes after Trump.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So you have to, and I'm not, you can say the probability of that is low. Well, that's fine, but you at least have to factor that into the analysis.
Sure. Yeah, of course. Of course. I think on net balance, as to use your term from a minute ago, though, I mean, I don't know.
Let me give you another example here. I don't think the wall is going to stop one person from coming over. So why build it when it can be used in the future?
I would disagree with you.
Chris, go to a border town and ask the Mexicans there how easy it is to get over to the United States, even if there's a wall. They laugh at it.
Yeah.
They literally almost buckle over in tears. So let's assume that it stops 5%. So okay, at what cost?
Right.
At what cost to not only build it, but to maintain it and to do all these other things? And then you have to ask, is it worth it, in considering the fact that could be used in the future to keep Americans in?
Right.
Exactly how the Berlin Wall was used. So I
get it. Yeah, I don't know how to handicap that, though. I mean, to me, at first glance, without thinking about it. I mean, what are you talking about? You're talking about tunnels. You're talking about boats carrying people through the water. I mean,
There's just so many tunnels that and now they just go ahead and walk over. But even if that was that wall, the people that are, let's just say, in the know, they know the tunnels to go through, and a wall is not going to prevent them from
Well, it's
going
going to
through.
prevent the people from walking over, though. It's going
Yeah,
to
well,
force them to.
right, but right now they're just taking the path of least resistance. So
Right.
those people that are now, there's a wall there, like, oh shit, I can't just walk across. Well, hey buddy, where was that tunnel? Oh, it was a mile down the road. Okay, I'll just go ahead and use that now.
Yeah, but don't you think like Border Patrol would start to have it, like, isn't there sonar or something they can use to try to, like,
So that's a different topic though, because I think that would be a better use of resources. The wall, I
what?
think, is just, it
I don't
doesn't make,
understand why we can't do both.
because again, we can do both, but it's just, where's the bang for your buck? And I
Right.
think you're going to have a lot more bang for your buck. And plus, it's not a way to keep Americans in. If you're increasing, let's just say, the Border Patrol, you're increasing the monitoring with drones and all these other resources that you could use. And I just think building that wall is just a massive waste of resources. And it just doesn't make any sense when you consider the possibilities of what that wall could be used for in the future. And you could just take those resources and allocate it to different areas where you would get a much better return on your investment, let's say.
Right. And so in this exodus from the country situation that you're talking about, people will, leave the country via the southern border, or
Well, who knows? I mean, who knows how it would work in the future? But if they, cancel your passport or something like that because you're involved in a trucker rally, and then you're like, okay, well, I'll just drive across the border, or I'll go across the border.
yeah, but you're going to get stopped at the border anyways.
Not if there's a tunnel.
You're talking about Americans being forced out of the country via tunnel because they went to a trucker rally and their passport was taken from them.
No,
Is that
I misspoke. So the trucker rally, yes, but if there's no wall, then that gives Americans better access to leave.
meaning they're going to blow through some type of immigration checkpoint and leave the country essentially illegally?
Now the Mexicans can just walk across and go through
Right.
tunnels, depending on what they have access to. And my point is, let's just go back to the Berlin Wall.
I lived on the northern border. I lived in West New York on the New York Canada border, and it was like there was like you could just take a jet ski and go right across the Niagara River, and nobody would even, like, every once in a while the Coast Guard came by and, like, would stop you. You're not supposed to do it, but you could. And, like, but then, like, if you wanted to try to use a car to get across, like the Queenston Lewiston Bridge or something, there was no access to get across without coming into contact with customs.
Yeah, and this is why I would rather reduce the incentives for illegals to come over, as opposed to just build this massive wall like the Berlin Wall. That let's go back to East Germany. Would you have had all those people locked in that area if they didn't have the wall with some guy standing on it shooting people that try to cross?
Right.
Most likely, they would not. The government would not have been able to control people to that extent if it wasn't for that wall. That's
that makes sense. It makes sense. And you've been ahead of the curve on, like, every time I've thought that you said something that sounds insane, you've always been right, and I've been wrong. So this is hopefully this isn't one of those occasions.
No, it's not about being right or wrong. I'm just, at least if I do say something that sounds completely insane, whether I'm right or wrong, hopefully I've got some rationale to back it up.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, at least I understand the argument.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I think we can do a combination of both. The disincentivizing, which I think is happening with a broad stroke,
for sure.
And then I don't think I don't think having some type of physical boundary, though, on the border is a horrific idea. So maybe within reason.
Yeah. Well, again, if we could quantify it, then we could determine if we should double down or if we should allocate those resources somewhere else.
Right.
I'm just giving you my opinion on what I think the data would show, but at the end of the day, right. Who knows?
Well, it just feels like, it feels like the idea of laughing off a wall because there's a tunnel a mile away where you can get through is just like, I mean, how have we not figured that out? And I'm sure we haven't, under the last couple administrations. But I mean, that feels like it's something to me that we could take minimal investment. Like, if there's an earthquake in the middle of Bhutan, we know about it. So like, how can we not figure out, a tunnel system from Mexico to the US? But I don't know. I don't know anything about what I'm talking about. So there's a high likelihood I'm wrong about a lot of what I'm saying.
Yeah, the one thing I can assure you now, maybe this wall could prevent illegals from coming over. The one thing I can assure you it won't prevent is the cartels from coming over, because these cartels are extremely, extremely sophisticated, regardless of how Trump paints it. And
they're in league with the people they need to be in order to get here, right?
Yeah, and they literally have hundreds of billions of dollars in resources.
Right.
So if you think a wall is going to stop the cartels from bringing in fentanyl or something like that, you're completely lying to yourself. It's totally naive. Okay, so now let's go and talk about Powell's comments today. I think they're rather hawkish. Did you see this, Chris?
I didn't. So this is another one I'll be doing an analysis of 12 seconds after I see it.
Okay, so the headline, Fed Chair Powell says central bank doesn't need to be in a hurry to lower interest rates further. Key talking points. Fed Chair Jerome Powell reiterated the central bank's commitment to bringing inflation down and signaled policymakers aren't in a rush to get interest rates lower. Powell's comments came in the first two appearances this week on Capitol Hill. So again, to me, that sounds rather hawkish. And we'll get to the way the market's moved in a minute here. But what
sounds like where he left off, right? I mean, wasn't the last precedent that he set a week ago? I don't know if it was Fed minutes or something very similar.
Yeah. And here I want to highlight, with our policy stance now significantly less restrictive. This is where I've got to call him out. I have to call him out and I've got to call out the mainstream media. I've got to call out a lot of these quote unquote experts on Twitter as well, because they'll just look at this and they'll say, oh, well, yeah, obviously it's a less restrictive because they've cut by 100 basis points. And that's it. End of story. Where if you just take a second to think that through, say, what's the most important interest rate in the overall economy? Is it the Fed funds rate or is it the 10-year treasury?
Right.
And so exactly. So Chris, let's look at the 10-year. And this is when they started cutting rates right around here. The 10-year is about 3.6. And now it's up to 4.5. So, and down from a high of, call it 4.8. So you tell me how the Fed has made things less restrictive. And in a way, I think the Fed could be possibly just held hostage by the 10-year. Because if you're dropping rates and that increases inflation and growth expectations, and therefore the long end of the curve is going up, and you want the long end of the curve to go down, what are you going to do? You almost have to pause, right? Because you're skittish. You don't know that next 25 basis point cut could make the 10-year treasury, let's say, go up over 5%. And then what does that do to mortgage rates, right? And while at the same time, you've got Besant and Trump sitting there whispering in your ear, telling you they want the long end of the curve down. So I think I don't know if this is Jerome Powell just controlling the market as it is so much the market controlling Jerome Powell. What are your thoughts?
It might be both. I was actually asking Peter Schiff about this last night about, what happens if the bond market essentially breaks and the 10-year, goes over 5%. It's just like you're describing. The Fed stays put, and then the spread between the federal funds rate and the 10-year blows out to 150 basis points. And the answer is what
normalizes.
What's that?
In other words, normalizes. That's usually where it is.
Yeah, exactly. But the answer is that, what we both know is going to happen is the Fed's going to print money to buy bonds. Like they're going to have to do like some form of like yield curve control.
Yeah, but that's an unknown, to say the least, because
it's an unknown that they'll do it, or it's the result of it will be an unknown.
The result of it, because
100%. It'll be a nightmare.
The 10-year Treasury yield went up. And so why is that? Because you would think that as the Fed comes out and buys and buys and buys and buys and buys, it creates all this demand, which lowers rates at the long end. But again, it's not about really the demand and supply coming from the Treasury and the Fed. It's more so about inflation expectations. So if inflation expectations go up as a result of that quantitative easing, I can almost assure you that rates will go up, even if their intention is to do yield curve control.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. To be honest.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, what Jerome Powell is doing as far as the pause and his rhetoric is a result of the 10-year Treasury yield going up by 100 basis points.
Well, a lot of the
by 100.
Right, I get it. But also a lot of the inflation data that came in over the last month also supports taking a more hawkish stance. There was some, I think University of Michigan, one of the inflation expectation surveys came in, I think, higher than expected. And then I don't know if it was CPI or PPI, but one of them came in hot last month. And so the fact of the matter is they don't have inflation near their 2% target at all. They're going to have to, at some point, capitulate and admit that they want inflation to be higher. The data is just, it's crazy. I put a thing on my YouTube channel like probably 1 year ago today would be my guess, if I had to guess the date. Jim Cramer did this big proclamation on CNBC that, with this animation of a plane landing, Jerome Powell has done it. He's landed the plane. It's been a soft landing. And I was like, this motherfucker has no clue. Like, first off, we were at I think CPI was at probably between 3 and 3.5% at the time. And I was just thinking we're not even close to having a soft landing. So this is another one. This is like doing QE and saying that you're going to unwind it right after and then never doing that. This is going to be the same thing. Hey, here's what we're looking for from a soft landing. We're looking for a 2% target and the economy to hold up. And that's just not going to happen. And a lot of us from day one, you included, me included, have said there's just no way that they can get rates into somewhere near real rate territory with all of the debt outstanding and not just break something. And the only question is what's going to break? Is it going to be the bond market? Who knows? But I certainly don't envy Jerome Powell's position here, because at some point, I saw how equities responded today. At some point, they're going to what's that?
Were they down?
Yeah, they were. They were down. But at some point, they're going to be down, a lot down. And when that happens, Trump is going to really give it to Powell. And he's going to be in a very unenviable position because he's got the math working against him. He's going to have politicians working against him. He'll probably at some point have most of the country working against him. And this is what's interesting about having a bipartisan agreement on Keynesian economics, right? I think everybody should be wary of anything that both parties agree on. But the one thing that's never brought up in the political discussion between the two political parties is whether or not monetary policy makes sense. Both sides just accept that this new Keynesian economics, this modern monetary theory is the standard. This is the gold standard of how to do it. And with that, you get these weird juxtapositions, like Elizabeth Warren, demanding that Jerome Powell lower interest rates a year ago, and the Republicans at the time saying that they should keep rates higher because inflation under control. And now the magnetic poles are going to reverse here a little bit, I'm sure, to some degree. So, hey, man, I'm glad I'm not in any position of responsibility. The only thing I think about is how can I position myself for any type of major, disruption, whether it's housing, whether it's sovereign debt. Am I diversified a million ways from Sunday to handle whatever type of shock comes down the pipe? Because, it may be hyperinflationary shock, which nominally would look better on paper. But there's a million different unprecedented outcomes that could come from this. And like I said, Powell's in a very unenviable position, if you ask me.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're seeing with the small business survey that we talked about in the first story. And, going back to your comment on Keynesian economics, it's just amazing to me that whenever these governments do quote unquote stimulus, like China, right? Oh my gosh, Chris, they're coming out with a bazooka. And then 2 weeks later, oh, well, they're coming out with another bazooka and more stimulus and more. And never once do the experts sit back and say, you know what? Maybe the stimulus doesn't work. It's always, oh, well, you just didn't do enough stimulus.
Right.
It's just amazing that they're that obtuse.
Well, at some point it won't.
What?
At some point it won't work.
It never works. What are you talking?
Well, look, I mean, even nominally, it won't even give the appearance of working. In other words, it won't drive markets higher.
But look at Japan. It's
right.
They have decades of it not working.
Right.
And instead of looking at that and scratching their head and saying, you know what, maybe our models are incorrect, or maybe we should at least try to figure out why the stimulus hasn't worked, so then we can tweak it moving forward. But they why we're at a spot
where if we raise rates 25 basis points, it sends a shockwave through the entire global economy that crashes markets 5 to 10% the next day, like they just did.
Yeah, it's never just looking back. It's having the self-awareness, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, to look at things in the past, analyze them, and say, maybe we got this wrong. And then maybe we need to adjust moving forward. But, they don't want to admit it, because at the end of the day, the only power the central banks have is just psychological power. Correct. And I think that, this 10-year treasury is just a great example of how they don't really control interest rates, obviously at the long end, but they might not even control them at the front end. They just follow the 2-year treasury. But you have to ask yourself, if Jerome Powell is really worried about, quote unquote, sticky inflation, is the interest rate or the restrictive policy that would prevent the inflation from going higher or bring it down to the 2% target, is that more effective now that the Fed funds rate is 100 basis points lower, or was it more effective before they started dropping rates? You see, my point there is that the policy, the intention of the policy to bring down rates to ease the unemployment data, or to ease the unemployment rate, and therefore, okay, we've got inflation coming down. In reality, it's had the opposite effect, right? In other words, the 10-year treasury going up. So you could argue that he is fighting inflation more now that he's dropped interest rates by 100 basis points.
Right.
And so how does he fight inflation? By raising interest rates. Well, you could argue that will bring down the long end of the curve, which would exacerbate inflation.
Right.
And this, again, it just illustrates how they've painted themselves into a corner, and really their only game is just psyops. They're the Wizard of Oz.
No, you're right. You're right. It's like we said last week, the path just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller until there is no path.
Yeah, but when does the market wake up to that? Because they should have woken up to that. I mean, they should have woken up to that 10 years ago. And
you're telling me. I've been telling paid subscribers that for years, and I would like to know the fucking timeline, but I think I owe it to them at this point.
Yeah,
but you're right. That's
one of the first times that I interviewed Jeff Snyder. I asked him, I said, how would you quantify a win for the economy in terms of the Federal Reserve? What would the Federal Reserve have to do in order for you to say, okay, this is going to benefit the economy? Or what would have to happen in the real economy for you to come to that conclusion? And he gave me a perfect answer. He says, when nobody in the real economy knows the name of the Fed chair.
Right.
That's when we win.
That's a great answer, because right now, if a Fed chair takes a 12-minute bathroom break during the middle of an FOMC meeting, it moves markets. And that's just not, first off, it doesn't resemble anything close to free markets. It's what has distorted markets so much so that bad data, catalyzes a positive reaction in the stock market.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sickening. When I first started learning about macro, like 10 years ago or whatever, that was the first question I was asking, because immediately, as soon as it came to me, I'm like, as soon as I started to understand it, rather, I was like, well, this can't go on forever. So here we are 10 years later, and, we've seen the NASDAQ triple off its COVID lows and all this bizarre stuff happen. But nothing scratches me the wrong way more than blatant distortions in the market. Negative economic data, meaning the stock market goes higher. Positive economic data, meaning the stock market goes lower. Now, a lot of people argue, okay, well, the stock market's a forward-looking indicator. So, it's always trying to guess what's coming a year down the road, 2 years down the road. Like, that's fine. But ostensibly, if the compass was calibrated properly, an economic boom would be all things moving in tandem together. The stock market would go up as the economy is growing, as GDP is rising, and not the opposite. And so we're at a place now, especially like say you believe crypto is completely worthless, all crypto is worthless, right? Which for the most part, I believe, save for the Bitcoin network, which I think has some value. But let's just say you think all crypto is nothing. It's just numbers being moved around on a sheet, and that's that. Here we are with first off, and no matter what, even if you're positive on crypto, you have to admit that the industry is, has a ton of froth in it. And we've seen names like Celsius and FTX, and there's plenty more of it out there. We'll find out about it at some point. The point is, a worst case scenario is that you have an entire asset class and an entire industry that is nothing, arguably provides very little product or service, at least to a degree where I can articulate it very well. And then, cue the comments like, oh, you just don't understand it. No. The problem is I do understand it. But that is a distortion, right? You don't get a crypto market where it is now and $3 trillion in total market cap or whatever it is, and a whole cottage industry full of crypto companies, other than exchanges, none of which I can really tell you like what the fucking purpose of is. But you have this whole industry that very arguably could be complete and total froth. So then it's like, okay, well, like, how does something like Fartcoin become this like fungus that fucking grows on what should otherwise be a healthy, normal economy full of normal, transactions? I pay my rent. Okay. I'm paying for the right to use this house. I pay for my coffee. Okay. I'm paying for a product or service this morning. I pay, somebody to give me a haircut. Okay. I'm paying for a service. How does something like that, how does that fungus kind of grow off the economy? And the answer is the distortions created by central planning that have incentivized behaviorally the speculation and risk taking and moral hazard that comes with, ostensibly unlimited quantitative easing and this assumption of the Fed put. So these distortions are very real and they're everywhere. And, they all just kind of tell me that we're just, the economy is just on this mushroom trip where like, our sense of reality is just gone and we're just completely somewhere else where there isn't just any economic laws. There's no natural laws, and that's frightening.
Yeah, I mean, and there's no ethical laws either. If you really want your blood to boil, we should have Josh tell you about one of his, we'll say, acquaintances that he knows there in Scottsdale, where the kid's like 24, 25 years old, and he's making literally millions of dollars just by creating these meme coins based around whatever's in the news, whether it's, you want to tell him the story, Josh?
Yeah, he was just some doofus that I met in the sauna. But what he does is he has this online presence, or he kind of fakes an online presence, and then he gets all these people into a Discord, and then the Discord is called something around meme coins. And what the people in the Discord think that they're doing is they're all going to jump in and invest in a meme coin and it's all going to go up. Like they're openly like pumping and dumping stuff. But what he does is he creates them, and then he has all these other people do it, and then he just dumps it on them. But he's saying this like he's like proud of it, and he's like revolutionizing like business. And he has no clue what he's doing. It's completely illegal.
Yeah, that's the kicker there, Chris, is that these young kids, they just see this on, they're good at computers and technology. And they, like, to Josh's acquaintance there, he literally doesn't even realize that's illegal. Like, he has no
Right. No, he probably doesn't. And first off, it's not going to be like enforced anytime soon. It doesn't seem like. But then think of the mindset of the people that become the participants, right? I mean, you can dial it back from like, okay, like we have a full embrace of crypto, so this is okay because, you know, I've seen all these other meme coins moon. There's no need to ask about why I would ever want to own this or what it really does. And you can dial that all the way back a million steps back to just simply not having the sophistication and the understanding to know the basics of finance, because nobody's fucking walking around teaching Milton Friedman in high school, you know?
Right.
So there's no like, it just starts with like there's no econ 101. Like people just don't understand how to balance a checkbook. They don't understand the difference between credits and debits. They, you know, and why should they when there's economists on television making the argument that taking on debt is a great way to pay off your debt? It's just, why should anybody understand? We're so far off the path. It's frightening. And the further
the economy is what I always call it.
What do you say?
The financialization of the economy, and the visual I always use that kind of illustrates the point you were making is a hot air balloon. In a healthy economy, the balloon should be the economy itself, and the basket should be assets, or the S&P 500. And what we've got is the complete reverse, where the balloon is assets, S&P 500, and the economy is actually the basket.
You're perfect. Perfect analog. Yeah. And the bigger the balloon gets and the higher it goes, the more hell there's going to be to pay. And this one that's coming, man, I don't know what it's going to be. I pray to God it's not in my lifetime. And I don't want to be right. I really don't. I'd rather have prosperity and be wrong for the rest of my life. But I just feel like this next one that's going to come, it's going to just fucking blow the doors off people.
Do you really have prosperity if you've got the economy that's that financialized to where the only people who are have their purchasing power increasing or their standard of living increasing are just those people at the very, very top that hold the assets, and that's getting fewer and fewer and fewer. And then at the bottom, these people are struggling more and more and more. And, you know, when can they buy a house? Well, they've been priced out of the market. You know, when can they buy stocks at a reasonable price? They can't. They've been completely priced out of the market. So these people, and the younger people especially, they don't have an option. Like the only option they have is to gamble. So it kind of makes sense, the meme coin mentality.
And to them, there's no difference between a cash generating company with cash on its balance sheet and no debt that pays a dividend and a meme coin. There's no difference.
Number goes up. Who cares? There is no difference.
100% right. And there will be devastating consequences to that en masse at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's move on here to something that I didn't mention at the beginning, but I'd love to get your take on this, because I know you've been studying Elon Musk and Tesla for quite some time, and he just came out, meaning Elon Musk, and he came out with this offer right here to Altman. I think it's $97.4 billion for OpenAI. So, and I know that nobody's perfect, and as human beings, we all have our good traits and our negative traits, and Elon would definitely fit the bill there. But taking all things into consideration that he's done since, let's just say 2015, that you've studied, and then combining that with what he's done more lately with Doge and maybe OpenAI, what are your views now of Elon Musk?
Well, look, I think he's a brilliant strategist in the sense that I was short Tesla for a very long time and got my head stomped in for a while being short Tesla. And, I think that his strategy to ingrain himself with the administration here was a brilliant one. I think that he was right when he said, if Kamala Harris gets elected, I'll go to jail. There's been several like pending investigations into Tesla, into full self-driving. There's a whole litany of them, the NHTSA, the DOJ. And so, I think I think it was a brilliant move strategy wise. And he certainly outfoxed me in the sense that I thought, there was going to be some type of check that came due for him. And it doesn't look as though that's going to be the case. And so, in that respect, I give him a lot of credit. As far as, the way things are going now, I mean, what you just breezed past on that CNBC site that you were on was also a quote of Tesla, which is down like $20 today. And it's down from 400 plus, I think, a couple of weeks ago because the delivery numbers overseas have started to fall. I think that I'm not sure if, his ties to the administration were thought through as it'll relate to the, brand equity. And so there, like everything else, like I was talking about earlier, like there'll be some consequences that come with that. I think the thing with Sam Altman, I mean, it's just, I don't, they have some kind of beef like going back some years. So I don't really know enough about it to care or make any type of, but I think if the one thing I would offer up is, that you can spread yourself too thin. And I learned that playing Risk for the first time. I had one small army in every little country and I got wiped out. The point is you got to consolidate yourself in one area and focus on that area first. And so, with all of the companies that he has and all of whatever he's doing with Doge now, he has a lot on his plate. And so I'll be interested to see the way the rest of this plays out. As far as, being critical of Tesla, I've made my criticisms abundantly clear over the last 5-6 years. And as far as the trade is concerned, like I couldn't be short Tesla here, and I wouldn't, just because of how ingrained he is with the administration. And but who knows? Like the fundamentals look like they are faltering, and if the economy starts to pull back, and with Trump rolling back the EV subsidy, the $7,500 EV subsidy, it's a jump ball right now. But I'd be cautious of spreading myself too thin if I were him. But I do have to give him an immense amount of credit for what he has pulled off thus far.
What do you think drives, let's just say, the actions he's taken over the last year and a half or so with the political stuff and buying Twitter and, trying to be a champion of free speech? Do you think that's driven by business or?
I don't know. I think if you go all the way back, it's driven by something internally. There's some, like all of us, everybody's got a hole they're trying to fill. And without, a psychological analysis of the situation, I don't know what that looks like. But to me, like the purchase of Twitter and things like that, like, those always kind of seemed like erratic moves when they were happening. Something like, for me, as somebody that is pretty intimately familiar with securities laws and worked on the short side for a long time and am generally a skeptic and a critic, like when you see somebody fake a buyout offer for their company, there's two ways to look at that. You can look at it in jest, like, hey, I was just joking, or, funding secured doesn't really mean funding secured. Or you can take it with the seriousness with which the market took it, which was to immediately move billions and billions of dollars in stock. And so, the way that I look at markets is very different than I think the way that he looks at markets. I'm far more a skeptic and far more of a rule of law guy, I think, as it comes to markets. But what was the question again?
Well, I always wonder about Elon Musk, and it's going to be a combination of both.
Oh, what drives him, right?
Is it really the business and doing what's best for business, or is it principles? Like is he buying Twitter?
I don't really know. A lot of what he's done up to this point, feels like he's making the decision first and then dealing with the consequences later. Like, hey, we're gonna do
making the decision, right? Like, did he buy Twitter because he knew he had some, let's say he'd been doing some shady things with Tesla and the 420 tweet and whatnot, and he wanted to control the narrative, just like Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post, right?
I don't really know if that was the case, because when you think back to it, it was at least put out there as this question of free speech and people being kicked off the platform and things like that. At least that was the reasoning that was publicly used. It was like in 2021 during COVID when, he was saying that the government should get off everybody's back with, shutting everything down. Now, do I agree with him? Yes. Do I think he was saying that from a position of defending liberty, or that he wants to make the quarter and keep the Fremont factory open? I think it was probably the latter.
Right.
And so I think that a lot of his decision making, probably at the genesis of it, starts with what he thinks is going to be best for him and what he thinks is going to be best for Tesla and his interest. And I think those probably evolve from, like all of us, what type of childhood trauma we're dealing with, or holes in our soul we're trying to patch up. But I really, I don't know. Do I buy the line? It's tough, because there's been so many proclamations and so many stands and so many, for me, the way that I do business is I'll take one project and I'll focus very intensely on it, because it's like relationships. Okay. This is a good analog, right? If I'm dating, I want to date one person. I don't want to date 10 people. I don't want to fucking, be fooling around with a couple people. Not because I don't find other people interesting, but because I want my focus to be in one place. It's easier to focus on one person, to learn about them. They can learn about me. And then, hey, if it doesn't work, then I can move on to the next person or whatever. But these people that go out and they date 3-4 people at a time and they're juggling all these fucking balls in the air. That's not how that's not how I work. It's not how I live my social life. It's crazy.
Josh, do you have any experience with that?
I have no clue what you're talking about.
The camera's off this time too. He couldn't even show his face. Couldn't even show your face, could you, Josh?
Just some insider information on Josh, who everyone loves here. He is so popular on these dating apps, Chris, and this is a true story, that he actually has someone managing his accounts for him, because he gets so much interest from.
Yeah, but you're in fucking Colombia, aren't you?
No. He's in Scottsdale.
Oh, okay. Well,
Scottsdale, and he gets so much interest from so many women, like hundreds of women every single day on these dating apps, that he literally cannot manage it. So he's got to hire someone to manage his apps and actually text the gals for him and set up the date. And then the guy who's managing Josh's, let's say, social media, just tells him, the gal's name, sends him a picture, and then where to meet, and then he just shows up.
Well, I like that in the sense that you're bringing some efficiency into the process. Because for me, I get my best feel for people when I meet them in person. I hope for Josh, and I don't really give a fuck what Josh does, but I hope for him that once he starts dating somebody, he's not juggling the rest of this other shit. Look, I don't really care what anybody else does. I worry about myself. And for me, I try not to spread myself too thin. And that would be the advice that I would give to Elon Musk. Would be don't spread yourself too thin. Focus on dating fucking one person at a time. It just seems it's so much. The Boring Company, and then Tesla, and then fucking SpaceX, and then he's got Neuralink, and then he's got XAI, and he's just, and he's buying Twitter, and he wants to buy OpenAI, and it's all right. How can you there's just not enough hours in the day, and he's become and he has time to be the world's best Diablo 4 player. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't really need to understand it. All I know is I tried to short that stock on fundamentals, and I got my ass handed to me. And sometimes, I wrote in my mea culpa on my Substack, you just have to say, I don't get it. I'm never going to get it. And my best to you. You've outfoxed me at this point. It's like sometimes you can't, to go back to relationships. Sometimes you break up and it doesn't work and you can't really figure out why it didn't work. You just know it's not working. And so you spend 6 months ruminating about it and going to therapy and trying to figure it out, and you can't. You just have to say 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 in this case, and I'm not going to sweat it.
Yeah, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I do look at the things he does now with a bit of cynicism, just because of what he has done in the past and how many times he has lied and just promised, that he's going to do this and it never happens. Where's the Tesla Roadster, by the way? Oh yeah.
Well, none of this stuff has ever caught up to him now.
Yeah. So I just,
so that's the difference. That's the difference between me and everybody else. Like, I look at this full self-driving promise that, which started in 2016, and where we are now with things that many people were talking about a long time ago, that they would never be able to do it without LiDAR and radar. And here we are a decade later with a lot of people that paid for that hardware and stuff. And it's not really where, it was expected to be at this point. And so I just don't, I don't know how long everybody else's patience is going to run thin, but what I know is if the stock falls and continues to move lower, and other people like BYD, I just saw releasing their software, and Waymo is, obviously doing very well with self-driving. As those things progress, I think other people might lose their patience too. But
yeah, and I know you still know and communicate with a lot of guys kind of in the hedge fund space and whatnot. And you can tell them that I live here in Columbia and I see it every single day. BYD is taking over the world. BYD is taking over.
They're crushing it.
They're crushing it. Tesla is not even, it's not even part of the conversation, at least here in the emerging markets that I've seen.
When I was just in Mexico, BYD was everywhere too.
Yeah, it's the same in Argentina. I mean, it's there's something to, you got to pay attention to them. For sure.
Sure. I completely agree.
Yeah. And of course, you got to pay attention to what that's going to do to Tesla's competitiveness outside of these.
Well, it's already kind of like elbowed them out a little bit in China. Like, the domestic EV producers in China have just been going bananas. And I think there's way more of a domestic EV industry in China than anybody thought that there would be at this point. So I don't really know how that's all going to gel together, because I don't know like what his relationship is with the CCP. I don't know, there's a lot of unknowns. All I know is I got my dick punched in on the short, and I had to surrender. And listen, there's no ego here. There's no fucking loss of integrity. Like, sometimes you just get bested, and I got bested. And sometimes you just have to say like, hey, as he was going all in with Trump, I was like, I thought it was very clear why he was doing it. And
let me make you feel better, Chris. Gold is almost at an all-time high. So you might have got Tesla wrong, but you sure as hell got that one right.
Well, gold is at a price now where anybody who ever said to buy it has been right in nominal terms. And that's a nice feeling. Now the next question, as I was telling Peter Schiff, is people are going to start comparing, okay, gold versus the S&P, gold versus Bitcoin, gold versus, a million other benchmarks over a million other timeframes. Yeah, but it's down versus the S&P in 1 month. Oh yeah, it's down versus Bitcoin in 6 months. But I actually think in gold, that move is going to continue to accelerate. And, hey man, for as little as I know, the one thing that 10 years ago when I started looking at macro that I saw right off the bat was like, look, central banks are hoarding this. That tells you that this is where the buck stops. That's all I need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now let's go ahead, and I want to shift to kind of Trumponomics, because I heard a take today on one of my favorite podcasts. We'll give them a plug. It's Macro Mondays. And I don't know if you know Andreas Steno-Larsen, or if you follow him on Twitter. Brilliant guy.
I don't know.
And his partner, Mikkel, I think is his name. They're a couple Danish guys. And I just love this podcast. And they had this theory today that what Trump is doing is actually posturing to actually lower tariffs. So it was very counterintuitive. So I want to switch up the screen share real quick. We're going to play this clip. And then, Chris, I'd like to get your opinion on it. And I've got an opinion of my own here that I've been thinking about since lunch. So let's see.
I'll try to remember that in the middle of my 12-minute diatribe that's about to follow.
Josh, can you see this?
I mean, note to self, give George Gammon 13 seconds to say something.
No. This is all about just having fun here. Josh, can you see this?
Yep, you're good to go.
Josh is fucking swiping right now on a dating app. He's not listening to you.
His Tinder thing, yeah.
Yeah, Josh is thinking about his date tonight.
He's got all the alerts, just bing, 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 bing. He's got no time for this live stream, Chris.
I know. I can see him at dinner tonight. He's like, this asshole kept interrupting me while I was trying to talk to you. Right? And there's something about some shit on the screen. I wasn't listening.
All right, let's listen to this from Andres and Mikkel.
The Milei started cutting tariffs, but some of those big emerging countries, they have much higher tariffs than what we typically have in the West. And if they're faced with a tit-for-tat tariffs approach from Trump, it would be a catastrophe for the export out of emerging markets. But in Europe, we would be clapping because, we've lost ground to Brazil, to China, to India. Europe is in a sweet spot right now because in a tit-for-tat scenario, Europe doesn't apply big tariffs on the US. In some small niches, yes, but not on an average level. But to what extent can we deliver the same goods that they can from those countries? It will take some time, obviously, right? But we're talking about the change rate of change, basically. Yeah. So stuff moving back to Europe for economic reasons in case of reciprocal tariffs being implemented. So, the bottom line of this approach laid forward by Trump on Friday is that we should actually expect tariffs to come down globally, in my opinion, which is a very contrarian take right now. But, he's putting pressure on emerging markets.
Okay, so his point there, Chris, is Donald Trump is using this as a negotiating tool. We know that. But where he's going to focus most of his attention is on emerging markets that will have no choice but to capitulate and to lower their tariffs. And then he pulls back the tariff and doesn't implement it. And then if he's dealing with a country that does have some leverage, let's say Europe, their tariffs are already extremely low. So let's say they're at 2%. So Trump says 2%, they go up to 4%. Trump goes up to 4%. They say, okay, we're just going to stop there. Well, again, on net balance, he's reduced the tariffs, let's say from the emerging markets by 25%, and he's increased the tariffs on Europe by maybe 2%. So we actually have lower tariffs globally than we did to begin with. So what do you think? I mean, is he playing 5D chess here and we just don't know about it?
I don't know if it's 5D, but it might be 2D. I think Trump's style in general is to just fucking go for big air right off the bat and then see where you land. Yeah. And I think that is probably a negotiating tactic that he honed over the years as a business person, which is, which by the way, I respect. You want to make $100,000 a year in a job negotiation. You walk in and you ask for 150 because the guy's going to say, I can't do 150. How about 85? And you say, all right, I'll settle for 100, and bang, then you're there. So I think it's probably some of that, if I had to guess.
But do you think his true intentions are to lower tariffs, not raise them? And he's just using the threat of increasing tariffs to get the job done?
I think his intention in general is to be able to negotiate from some type of position of strength. And whether it's to negotiate for lower tariffs or whether or not he decides he wants France to send him a fucking cheese wheel every week, he wants to be able to call the shots, and he wants to be able to negotiate from some type of standing where he feels like he has a little bit of influence, you know? I mean, that's why when he shakes people's hands, he fucking grabs their arm. Like, hey, motherfucker, how you doing? You know, like, you're not pulling me over there. Like when he talks to people and he's like leaning forward, like he's about to jump out of an airplane skydiving. I think that's the general, probably what he's seeking. I think he's seeking, and by the way, I think it's a great thing, because I think for the last 4 years under Biden, and again, not making a partisan statement, because if this happened under Republican leadership, I would say the same thing. But I think over the last 4 years, you know, it became very well known to the rest of the world that the United States is a pushover. Just say the fucking magic word, whether it's equality or climate change or whatever, just give us some kind of line of bullshit and we will fall right over. And that's why we're involved in the Paris Climate Accord while China is still, you know, building coal power plants. And so I think he's just trying to recalibrate the scales of negotiation and, you know, be able to make deals from a little bit better of a position than Joe Biden, who, you know, was out and about for 2 hours a day and couldn't stay awake at meetings. And that was that. I mean, he wasn't calling the shots. So he's setting a tone, like I was saying with the immigration thing, setting a tone. I'm the fucking boss. I'm not afraid to, you know, pull out all the stops, come hell or high water. Let's start there, see what your opening bid is, and then we can negotiate.
Yeah, that's my base case, is he doesn't really care about tariffs globally and if they go up or down. He just wants to feel like he's, and maybe it's not just feeling, maybe it's happening in reality, where he's just negotiating better deals for the United States than we have now.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's really what it's all about. Chris, one more quick question. What do you think about the concept of a commodity super cycle? I know that's kind of a question out of right field, but that's something that I'm going to be talking about on a webinar this Friday in Rebel Capitalist Pro, and it's specifically pertaining to coal. And you know, I love buying things that are hated. I'm kind of like you, and I'm a contrarian in that stand.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite books was Hot Commodities from Jim Rogers. And this came out in 2002, 2003. And back at that time, one of Jim's favorite commodities was lead. And I know you're old enough to remember that lead was just the devil back then.
Right.
You know, it was in the paint, it was getting in kids' blood. It was like, we got to get rid of the lead. It was like asbestos. And he's like, sure, you're going to see lead demand go down in the developed countries, but we're still going to be using car batteries in China. I can guarantee you their economy is going to explode. And, you know, he just absolutely nailed it. Now, it is true that lead went up in part because we had that commodity super cycle. But I think that coal may be today's lead. And I know it went way up in price, but it's come down. But I think, you know, the long-term play there is very interesting if you think that these prices run in cycles of maybe 10, 15 years. What do you think?
Well, I'm sure that they do, because I think everything else runs in these big, like, super cycles. I think that the idea, you know, this reminds me of when oil went to, you know, negative $30 a barrel during COVID.
Right.
And one, you know, fucking rocket surgeon Kathy Wood went on television like a month or two later, and she's like, this is the end of the oil companies because EVs are going to just take over and nobody's going to need any oil anymore. And I'm like, you know, as somebody that actually has experience working with like at a company where we dealt with hydrocarbons and, you know, petroleum, so I understand like, you know, what those things are used for. I was like, this woman is fucking insane. You know, like, I get it. Like, I get the idea that why people that don't understand what oil is actually used for could think like, oh, electric cars, without thinking like, oh, well, where's the electricity coming from that's charging these cars? And like, what's in these batteries? And like, but yeah, I think, you know, it was a very similar situation where back then I was like, shit, like I can't buy enough Exxon here because at the end of the day, every fucking thing uses petroleum in some way or another. And it's just like lead. It's like any of these other things. And in terms of like a super cycle, what you should focus on during your whatever it is that you're doing on Friday is trying to get some semblance of a view on how commodities have performed versus certain benchmarks globally. Because in order to make the case for there being a super cycle, you're going to have to show, somewhere where commodities either versus the S&P or versus, global GDP or some kind of shit that you're going to have to pull out of left field, how they tracked with one another and now have diverged from one another. Just from a back of the napkin, like spitballing off the top of my head with no facts, no data, no proof, and no evidence, do I just get the Rick Rubin style feeling that commodities should be higher given the amount of money that we printed? Yeah, I just kind of feel that way. If I woke up tomorrow and gold was at 10,000 and silver was at 200, would I be surprised? Not really. I'd be more likely to say something like, it's about fucking time than what's going on here. Yeah. And I'm just saying that based on no data at all, just spitballing off the top of my head.
I think the reason why these commodity super cycles are so predictable is the cure for high prices or high prices, cure for low prices, where you just get up to a level, the price, where it decreases demand and then it incentivizes supply.
Right.
And therefore, you got all the supply come online, demand decrease. What happens to the price? It plummets down to where it's under the cost of production. And then you just get the same wave, just back and forth and back and forth, to where if you look at it in inflation adjusted terms, it kind of always tends to mean revert.
Well, it's crazy when the government can't print gold or print silver. It's like almost, or any other commodity, it's almost like price becomes a rationing mechanism like it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's really one of the few places, talk about commodities, where you have some sort of real price discovery. Because, although the Fed does have their thumb on the scale to a certain degree, it's not the same as one might argue with things that are more interest rate sensitive.
Right. And I love things that are finite in supply. So until we start mining asteroids, I can make the case for, you could talk to me about anything from palladium to lithium to lead to fucking copper to lumber. Anything that there's a relatively finite supply of in the commodity world, I would rather own than, something where more of it can be produced or created. It's, why there's a case for real estate too. It's so yeah, I don't know. That's my take.
Yeah. Very good. Chris, what's your Substack?
It's called Fringe Finance.
Very good.
FRINGE. So it's quotetheraven.substack.com.
Yeah, you guys got to check that out. Chris is obviously a very gifted person when it comes to the videos, but he's also very gifted in his writing as well. And what's funny about Chris's writing is it sounds so damn professional. And then when you actually hear him,
I don't know if you entertaining.
It's very insightful, but it's much different. So check out the professional, the suit and tie version of Chris Irons. You got to check out the Substack. And if you guys want to participate in that webinar that I'm doing this Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern time, you can go ahead and go to georgegamma.com/pro and just do a $1 trial, and you can join us live, or you can watch the replay of that. On that bombshell, Chris, thanks a lot for your time, buddy. It's always a pleasure to get your insights and go back and forth. I really enjoy it. For the viewers, make sure that you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, and we'll see you on the next video.